again, it's one of those things that keep me here for 23 years, is our Home for Life commitment. And this Home for Life commitment covers eligible residents who outlive their resources by no fault of their own. And this resident care fund supplements your resources to pay for your care when you run out of funds. And it's funded by residents, it's funded by employees, and it's funded by other fundraising activities to provide care for you in the event that that happens, the unexpected event that it happens. And no resident, I know in the 23 years I've been here, has ever been asked to leave one of our communities for the genuine inability to pay. And that says a lot about us as an organization and what we stand for and what we do. Okay? And we're going to have plenty of time for questions on the slides I just went over, but I'm going to let DJ begin to walk through his slides on how to evaluate a CCRC and talk about financial and operational metrics. Let me turn it over to DJ, and we'll come back up for questions after we're through, okay?
Outstanding, thank you, Jim. One of the things I failed to mention in my introduction, Fred had said that I've only been here 6 years. This is also the first time they let me out of the corporate office to come to a community to speak to residents. So I'm very excited to spend time with you today. And they asked me to talk about how would you evaluate a continuing care retirement community if that was something that you were considering to move into. And I, of course, did not have an idea of where to start. So I did what my children do and said, go to Google. So I went to Google, and we found an article in the New York Times that was written just a year ago that talked exactly about that. So if we could click to the next slide. So it talked about 7 key areas that you should focus on when considering a continuing care retirement community. And as I was reading the article, this is a picture of the couple that was featured in the article, and you can Google the article as well. I was reading through the 7 items that were in there, and I was thinking, wow, we do that, we check that box, this is good. So this was my content to share with you today. So we're going to walk through each one of these real quick here. Occupancy. So in the article, they talked about you want to look for a community that if it's exceeding 90% occupancy over the past few years, then they're doing something right. Yeah, I apologize. I'll try to keep my microphone stable and not
I think you
sound
have
like
the
in and out.
distance to the receiver. Walk towards the receiver.
Switch sides. We'll get the technical difficulties worked out. So what you see on the graph is our occupancy over the last 10 years. And when Jim was talking about the years right after bankruptcy, when Jim Davis bought the organization, he talked about the buildup of many of our communities. You can see that trend happening in the 2010, 2011 years, where our occupancy was ramping up as we recovered from that situation. And then since then, we've reached stability and our occupancy has been rather high. The other line on the graph is the occupancy from industry statistics, and we get those from the state of senior housing, so those are independent of us, and actually include our numbers. So the line with the squares is the industry, and we are included in that. If you took our really, really high occupancy out of that number, you can imagine the industry statistics would then drop down, and there may be some concern on average about those communities relative to ours. So another thing the article talked about was annual rate increases. So Jim mentioned that we do this every year, once a year, and then it's stable throughout the year. And I went and looked in our system and said, what were our increases in 2018 and then also in 2019? And sure enough, our average increase was just right at where the article suggested it should be, no more than, is 3.5%. One thing that's interesting to note, at some of our communities, the rate, this is an average across the entire enterprise. Some of our communities is a little higher some years, and some it's a little lower. And the things that drive our rate increases are wage pressures in the local marketplace, property taxes, insurance costs, health insurance, property insurance, all those things, utility costs. And we try to do a good job of hedging our utilities and doing other measures to manage our future cost growth. And we have a large purchasing platform that helps us control costs as well, so that we can keep these fee increases at these reasonable levels that the article was suggesting. The third item in the article was a debt rating. The article suggested that if your community has debt, you want to have investment-grade debt rating. So what's interesting is, and we've already shared this a little bit today, Siena Lakes, well, is not expected to have debt. We do not have debt. We are owned by Erickson, and so we have not gone out to the public. But some communities have offered municipal bonds and other public financing in order to fund the growth or repositioning of their communities. And so when they do so, they have debt. And then that debt is rated by Fitch and Company or other companies. And we do manage 4 communities that do have public debt. And in those 4 instances, 3 of those 4 are investment grade. Our ratings are from an AA minus down to a BB. And the one community that is a BB that's slightly under investment grade, you need 3 Bs in order to be investment grade. So we're right there on that cusp. But again, at Siena Lakes, public debt is not something that is in the consideration. The next thing the article talked about was profitability. So they summed it up very simply, saying that you want a community that brings in more cash than it spends. And this is important, and we'll get to that in a minute. So net operating income is the Erickson term that we use that talks about the revenues, the cash revenues that we bring in from monthly service fees and other services, minus our operating expenses to pay for the food costs, the utilities, all those other things for the services that are provided on the community. And that difference is net operating income. And this chart is very similar to the one you saw on occupancy, because in the earlier years, after coming out of bankruptcy and tweaking the operations model and building out the rest of those buildings and neighborhoods on those communities, our profitability has risen up to a stable level between 12 and 15% on average across all of our campuses. So one might ask, why is profitability important? Why do you want to have more money coming in than going out? There are lots of reasons. One is that you want to have a future sustainability of where you're going to be living. You want to make sure that in the future, if there's damage or something breaks down, a pipe bursts, anything that happens like that, we can pay for that. You want to be able to sustain a short-term market blip in any one of the cost factors that I've mentioned earlier. So profitability is important for that reason, and the next reason we'll get to is capital improvements. So over time, as you know, in your own homes, things wear out. They have a life cycle. The washing machine, the roof, all those things have a life cycle. And so you want to have money set aside for capital improvements. So the article talked about spending enough on upkeep. That was their word in the article. And the way they explained upkeep was that you're spending at least 50% of your depreciation. So for those of you who aren't finance nerds like me, I want to kind of explain that a little bit. So if we have a transportation vehicle on campus that you use to go to the coast and back, or wherever the vehicle is going to be going in it, let's say it costs $50,000 for us to purchase. So for accounting purposes, the $50,000 is spread over the useful life of that vehicle. We'll say it's 5-year useful life for simplicity. So we expense $10,000 a year related to the purchase of that vehicle. So that's our depreciation expense. So what the article is trying to say is next year, when you're spending money, you want to spend at least $5,000 on more new equipment, so that's half of our $10,000 depreciation, to upkeep things that are ongoing at your facility. That's all that means. And so when I went and looked, because we didn't have this statistic, we don't track an upkeep ratio at Erickson, but I went and looked, and it turns out in 2018, all the investments that we've made into all of our communities is 66% of our depreciation expense for 2018. And then I went and looked again for 19, and it is 59% year to date. So we're doing, relative to what the article suggests, we are doing an outstanding job of continuing to upkeep all the things that you use every day in your communities, in all the different areas, transportation, dining, all those different areas.
Is that a new metric you're going to keep tracking?
Yes, I'm gonna put that on our dashboard. We have a dashboard, and we're gonna have the keep ratio show up next year. Thank you. Reserves. So this reserve concept that the article talked about, again, is getting back to more of the life care concept that Jim was referring to. And in a life care concept, you need to make sure that you have enough funds set aside for future expenses. So in a life care situation, when you come in and you pay that higher monthly service fee that's stable over time, there needs to be enough money sitting around at that community so that when you get to the point that you may need health services, that it's there and they're able to afford that. And they bring in actuaries to do this study, and they do an actuarial analysis on each of the residents to do this computation. All that complication we don't have here at Siena Lakes. Instead, we are a fee-for-service arrangement, and so we don't need to have these reserves for future health care. However, we do have reserves because the great state of Florida requires that if we're going to be in this business and we're going to be providing you care over the future of your life, that we need to be able to have a way to ensure that we sustain our operations. And so the state of Florida requires us to give them about 1/3 of our annual operating expenses, and then they hold on to that for us in an account that is not controlled by us, and that can be accessed in the event that there is some kind of financial difficulty. And so each year then we provide reports, information about who our residents are, how much money we are bringing in, how much money we are spending, and then we fund that reserve with the state of Florida so that it's going to be there for you and us if needed. But we don't anticipate that we will ever need to use those reserves. So that's another reason why we want to have profitability, so there's money that can go into funding these reserve accounts. All right. The last thing the article mentioned was the residents' role in the community. So all of you neighbors are going to have concerns about certain things, joys about others, and you want to voice your opinion. And the way Erickson works is we have what's called a resident advisory council, and this is a handful of residents that work closely with management on communicating the concerns that you have, and also communicating the changes that management makes to the ice cream of the month or the coffee flavor or any of those things, communicates those out to you and your neighbors. And so this is a very powerful way for the residents to have a voice with management on some ideas and concepts and things you want to see happening here in your community. So let's go back and recap the 7 items that the article had. And as we go through, we check the box. Yes, we hit the occupancy number. We hit the occupancy percentage. We hit the rate increases. We are under those. We don't have to worry about our debt rating, but when we do, we check the box. Profitability, again, checking the box. All the boxes were checked. So I was excited when I got to the end of my article and said, hey, this is a great way for us to talk about Siena Lakes and to explain why this is a great place for you to consider as you're choosing your option of where to live in the future. And so with that, I would like to invite Fred back up to the front, and he will lead us through a question and answer session. And Jim and I will be happy to share with you any questions you have about here at Siena Lakes or the Erickson Enterprise.